Every day we hear a lot of people talking about how the housing market is going to crash. I can give you 5 reasons why it won't. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Dr. Lawrence Yun is the chief economist for the National Association of Realtors, and they recently put out an article talking about the current housing market. Now, we know that housing prices have been very high for the last couple years, but the biggest problem we have right now are interest rates, because that exacerbates the high cost of housing. High prices, high interest rates just kill the market. And so the market's begun to adjust a little bit by lowering prices in some of the houses because the interest rates haven't come down that much. But they have started edging down a little bit, so I want to go through that and talk about what we might see in 2023, particularly here in Phoenix, Arizona. On December 13th, Dr. Lawrence Yun of the National Association of Realtors provided a forecast for the 2023 housing market. He provides some historical perspective regarding how housing has gone in the past. So as we can see, there was a drop-off in housing during the big crash, 2007 to 2008, and then home sales slowly recovered until we reach 2022, where we see this large drop. So why is that? A huge slide from January of 2022 all the way through November, caused mostly by rising interest rates. Prices did have a little bit to do with it for sure, but rising interest rates put things out of reach for most people. And here we see sales change percentage from a year ago, actually go back to 2019 pre-COVID, and we see an up and down market. Then during COVID, we see the real estate boom when interest rates dropped, and then high mortgage rates kicked in, particularly this year, starting in March. March, we really saw a large decrease in buying. Now, buying had been suppressed a little bit already because a lot of people bought back during the COVID boom, and prices began to shoot up. And as those prices went up, fewer and fewer people could afford a house. High mortgage rates made it even worse. But we know this. We know that's going on out there. But we need to understand housing in general a little better. And long-term single-family housing starts. This is where new home builders come in and create new homes. Again, throughout the decades, we see up and down movement. And in 2005, we saw an enormous amount of building going on. And then we hit the subprime lending crisis, which caused a complete drop. New home builders had overbuilt during this period, and they weren't going to build anymore. They were losing money. So there's no way they were going to build if they're losing money. And that's something we should keep in mind for 2022 and 2023. So slowly, the new home builders got back into the market. 2014, we see a build, 2017, and then we get into COVID. And they're just about up to where they should be. A historic average of 1.202 million homes per year. And in 2021, they really began stepping on the pedal because they were getting good prices for those homes. Now in 2022, we see that begin to drop off. In fact, new home builders are slowing down the number of permits they're pulling, how many housing starts they predict for the next year. So if they slow down the number of houses and constrain supply to meet the low demand, that should stabilize prices for the houses that are on the market now. Two of the markets with higher median home prices than national average, Austin and Salt Lake City, have seen these same declines here and here. How does 2022-2023 compare to the last crash that we had? Well, we can see 8 million jobs were lost during that period, but currently we're seeing some losses of jobs in tech and in lending institutions. Now, of course, since fewer people are buying homes and no one wants to refinance at 7%, lenders don't need as many loan officers. So we see some lenders laying off their personnel, as well as some tech cuts. Total job payrolls during the last cycle, 130. With our current housing cycle, we have a strong jobs base with 153 million people employed. Total jobs, 138 to 158 million. Again, 20 more million jobs in this cycle than before. Subprime loans, they were very prevalent during that time. You might have heard of ninja loans, which no income, no job, no assets, people were able to buy a house. But now because of new regulation, there's virtually no subprime loans out. When we look at how many homes were built prior to the crash, In 2008, we had 7.65 million. Now in the current housing cycle, we have less. In fact, we're still short homes in the United States. We had a large inventory during the last crash, not so much right now. About a third of what was available back in 2008, and much lower mortgage delinquencies, many fewer homes in foreclosure. And this chart illustrates in 2008 how many foreclosures we had going. These are 90-day or more delinquencies or leading into a foreclosure. During the COVID lockdown, we had an increase again of mortgage delinquencies, but now very few. Same with distressed homes, very low. So the housing market in general is in good shape. The problem is the prices and the interest rates are just a little too high. To show you where we are in 2022 compared to 2021, median sales price nationally up 4.8%. Now in January, they were up closer to 20 year over year, but they've dropped down, particularly since June. March they started slowing. June was really put the nail in the coffin, and even in November when we hit 7% for mortgage interest rates, that really reduced the median sale price. At the same time, we have fewer fresh listings coming on the market. So again, there's lower demand, but there's also going to be lower supply. So there may be some stabilization of prices because people don't want to sell their home for a loss if they bought it last year and they have a lot of money invested. And as Dr. Yun points out, we had the highest rates in 20 years during October and November of this year. But now we're seeing continuing declines in that mortgage interest rate. Now, based on what Dr. Yun knew on December 13th, he was looking at possible rate decreases in the future here. However, we just found out that the U.S. government is going to spend a lot more money, $1.7 trillion on an omnibus spending bill. To give you an idea of how much money $1.7 trillion is, did a little calculation. If you spend $1 per second and you had $1 million, it would take you 11 days and 14 hours to spend that. If you had $1 billion, it would take you 31 years and 8 months. If you have $1.7 trillion, it would take you 53,906 years to spend that while spending $1 per second. That is going to be added debt for our national checkbook. And with added debt comes inflation. And if inflation picks up again because of this spending, we could see these declines in the interest rates reverse. We'll have to watch and see what effect this spending has on our economy. And it could take up 12 to 18 months before we really see the impact of that spending. Dr. Yun also made a prediction of where we might see housing booms coming up in 2023. You take a look at this list, see if it's someplace you'd like to be or someplace you'd like to avoid. And for a mortgage rate forecast is based on what we've already known. In the fourth quarter of 2022, we hit that high. In fact, we hit over 7 in November, and it looks like a slight decline maybe into the high 5s throughout 2023. So is there relief on the way? Not much. We're not going to get back to 3% mortgage interest rates for sure. And so this 5.5 to 5.75 will probably become the new normal. But did you know that there are already VA and FHA loans at this level right now? In fact, we can take a look at some mortgage rates. Now this is generic and this is national, but a 30-year fixed rate right now, 6.256, down from the high of 7.08. 30-year fixed FHA, 5.5, VA, 5.685. So we're already there. And if you buy down a rate from this level, you could get into the 3s. If you do a 2-to-1 buy down for the first year, you'll be at 3.5 or 3.6. And here you'll be at 4.2 for a 30-year fixed rate. So again, let's do a little deeper dive into 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Let's go look maximum. This is for all the records that we have. Again, back in 1991, we saw 18.36% mortgage rates, and they've consistently gone down until 2021 when we started getting into some serious inflation. And that inflation pretty much killed those low rates. The Fed could no longer keep rates low because they had to fight inflation, so they raised the prime lending. And from prime lending, we then see 10-year Treasury notes go up to where we are today. Take a little closer look to where we've been in the last month. We can see back in November 10th we hit 7.08, and just a few days later we received a lower than expected inflation rate, which caused this to drop. Almost immediately in the next few days we saw a drop from 7.08 down to 6.6, and then in December, again on December 13th, we received another report, lower than expected inflation, and we've seen this trickle down to 6.27 on the 30-year fixed mortgage rate average. And again, this is not low enough for many people to buy a home without buying down rates. And that is a key tool that you have with your lenders. You have to take a look at what lenders offer, and when you go to buy a home, will that seller help you fund some of that buy down? Another thing to keep an eye on if you're interested is the 10-year Treasury note, because the 10-year Treasury note is sort of the baseline. Every time the 10-year Treasury goes up, the next day you'll see mortgage interest rates go up. When the 10-year Treasury note goes down, the following day you'll see a drop in mortgage interest rates. Talked a little bit about back in October and November when we really peaked on the 10-year Treasury. We see October 24th 4.24 or 4.25, and on November 7th we are at 4.2. Now you remember November 7th, where we are at 4.2 on the 10-year Treasury, that's the same time we hit 7.08% mortgage interest rates. Since then, with these good inflation reports that we've received, incrementally, that 10-year Treasury note has gone down, hitting the lowest at 3.4% on December 7th. Now the stock market has not been really performing well, and when the economy doesn't perform well, then the Treasury raises the return on the 10-year Treasury note so that we can get our debt funded. So in the last few days, we've seen this top out at about not quite 3.7%, but at least it's lower than the 4.21% we had just a month ago. If this continues to trend down, if the stock market does well, if we have a late year Santa Claus rally, we hope to see the 10-year Treasury drop even further, which means your mortgage interest rates will drop as well. Every morning when I wake up, I turn on the financial news to find out what the 10-year Treasury is doing. That is the linchpin for mortgage interest rates. But you may ask, well, why don't I look at what housing is doing? Well, I do that too. In tomorrow's video, I'm going to talk about the Phoenix market and how, while people are saying the Phoenix market is crashing, I'm going to show you it really isn't. Prices are down since June, but year over year, prices are still up in Phoenix. And I'll show what happened from January through April with prices in the Phoenix market, and then June, where we started getting really high mortgage interest rates, how it began to tail off. I'll also do a comparison of Surprise, Arizona, which is becoming a more mature community now. A couple years ago, it was like the new place to be. Now, Goodyear and Buckeye are that place. But Surprise will give us a good idea how one of the newer communities in Phoenix is reacting to this market. So, check in tomorrow and see that other video. As always, give me a call if you have any questions. If you want to talk about the market in Phoenix, definitely, if you want to talk about the market where you're at and you need an agent to do that, give me a call and I'll find you a great agent to have that conversation.